We are live, Ryan.
Okay.
So let's wait a few minutes. Just our viewers can join us.
Aida, how is the weather in Bishkek today?
Oh, the weather is perfect. It's
Is it nice?
sunny. Yes, it's great.
Not too hot?
No, it's too hot. It's
Is it hot?
really too, yes. So how are you, Ryan?
I'm good. Yeah, of course the weather here right now is beautiful in the Northwest. It's the best time to be here. And I'm healthy and I'm safe. So I'm very lucky. I'm very fortunate to be in a good place. But like I was saying earlier, America is struggling as well as Bishkek, and Kyrgyzstan is struggling with COVID. So it's a very complicated time, but we're doing our best and we're trying to stay safe. So that's the most important part.
Yes, I agree with you. And I really like the green nature behind you.
Thank you.
So
do we.
Our followers join us. So good evening, dear friends, Bishkek American Center followers. We hope you are all doing well this time. Thank you very much for joining our session today. We come back with our regular virtual English writing class, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Ryan Bartlett, who always leads this virtual class. He is U.S. Embassy Bishkek representative, and we are very happy to have you, Ryan, today. So last time we learned about American idioms, and it was a really exciting and very interesting session. Today, Ryan will make a presentation about American proverbs. So I think it's gonna be also awesome and informative session. I would like to remind you, friends, so please feel free to ask your questions and leave your comments under this video. And after the presentation, Ryan will answer them. So I think we can start.
Okay. Thank you so much, Aida. Again, very happy to have you back in action and to see that you're feeling well. Hello, everybody in Bishkek and Kyrgyzstan and maybe other people in Central Asia as well. It's nice to be back here for another in our series of the virtual writing classes with you in a very complicated time. My last class, I didn't acknowledge the situation, of course, in Bishkek and around the world as well. And I just want to say that my heart is with you. The American Embassy is with you right now. We're all struggling. It's a very difficult time, and I just want to encourage you all to be safe and to take care of yourselves and your families and your communities as best as you can. But one of the things that we can do while we're maybe at home a little bit more is to improve our English. So that's probably why most of you are here, and I'm happy to help. I used to teach English as a foreign language for a few years before I was working with embassies. So I have a little bit of background. But honestly, the topic of American proverbs, that was a little bit of a new topic for me. That was a recommendation from our last class. As Aida mentioned, we talked about idioms, specifically American idioms. But of course, idioms are not specific to American English. They're not specific to English. We have many idioms in many different languages. In Russian, of course, lots of idioms, and even Kyrgyz, you have idioms. So I think the idea of idioms, maybe that's easier for you to understand how to use them. But of course, they're very specific to each language. You can't really translate idioms very well. And the same goes for proverbs. Proverbs you also have in many languages, including Russian and Kyrgyz. So I think the idea of proverbs is something that you're familiar with, but once again, we cannot really translate those into another language because they're very connected to the culture that they're in. So you just have to study them in context, we say, or in the environment of the native language and in the culture to really understand them. So I'm going to kind of compare the difference between idioms and proverbs for you. As we talked about last time, we explained the idioms were basically a type of a expression or a saying. And I was just looking through the idioms that we were talking about and noticed that it's kind of an observance, something that you notice, and then you can you express that thought in a kind of a colorful, I say colorful because it's almost like poetic or artistic way to describe something that you see or observe. But Proverbs, it's a different type of a message that you get with a proverb. It's usually some kind of a moral lesson or some kind of a wisdom, right? And I think often proverbs tend to be passed down from generation to generation. So you might hear your parents or even your grandparents use proverbs. Of course, probably in Kyrgyz and Kyrgyzstan, it's going to be more in Kyrgyz or Russian. But these are moral lessons that usually come from your elders, right? Your parents or older people in your community often will use proverbs to give you a moral lesson, to tell you the right thing to do, or what to expect, or something that they've learned growing up. So proverbs have a very interesting message, different than idioms. And the form, the difference, idioms, as you saw last time, it can either be a phrase, just a collection of words, not a complete sentence, or sometimes they can be a complete sentence. We're going to look at a few examples here in a minute, so we'll point out the difference. But proverbs are almost always complete sentences, and sometimes there are even more than one sentence. Some proverbs contain two sentences. Most are just one complete sentence. That's the form for most proverbs in English. And proverbs are often famous quotes. So there was maybe one person that said this proverb originally, and sometimes you can find out who that person was. So if you, as you're learning about proverbs, and you find a proverb that is very interesting to you, you can Google that proverb and ask who was the author or who was the original person that came up with that. And often you can find a name for those. Idioms, I don't think many of the idioms, even though they're popular in American culture and other places, they usually aren't connected with a person as much. But I think proverbs tend to be more connected to the person who said them. So that can be something interesting to look at as well. And then the meaning of idioms, as we spoke about last time, it's not in the words, right? So that idioms can be a little bit more challenging than proverbs in this way. So if you read in an idiom, or if you hear an idiom, most likely, you might not understand what it means because the words don't really indicate the meaning. So it's a figurative meaning, not a literal meaning. And that means it's very difficult to guess the meaning of a lot of idioms. If you just hear an idiom, you really might not know what it means. But proverbs, they're different like that. The words often mean what they say. So you can often guess the meaning of a proverb if you hear it or if you see it in writing. So that's makes it a little bit more easy. Some of them may be a little bit more complicated, but often you might be able to just guess what that means. And then the use, idioms are informal, as we spoke about, but the wording is important in idioms. So you can't really change the words too much for the idiom to make sense for the listener or for the person who's reading it. So you kind of have to remember the words. You can change a little bit, but really you need to remember the words that you use. So it's almost a bit more poetic in that way. But the Proverbs, although they're also informal, we don't use those in formal writing, but you will see those in informal writing. The wording, the exact words that you use is not as critical. It's the meaning of the idea that you're saying that's important. So you can change the words a little bit, and in different regions in the US and maybe even in different countries, you'll see slight variations in Proverbs. So a little bit different depending on where you are, but the meaning is essentially still the same. So that is a good comparison and contrast between idioms and Proverbs. And again, a lot of this was new to me, although I grew up hearing both idioms and Proverbs. I haven't really taught Proverbs directly before. I have taught idioms, so this was good for me, and I'm happy for the chance to differentiate idioms and Proverbs for you. So, of course, the best way to learn idioms or Proverbs is to look at them in context and look at some examples. So we will continue on and look at some examples. These are, I just put a few of the idioms that we used last week for the last class, some of my favorites. It's not rocket science, right? So if I say it's not rocket science, you know, unless you are a native speaker or you've heard this before, you might not know what I'm talking about. We're not talking about rockets. We're not talking about science. If I say, you know, learning Proverbs, it's not rocket science. What I'm meaning is that it's not very complicated, right? So there's not a lot of rules. And rocket science, of course, it's very, very complicated. I don't know rocket science, but that image should give you an idea of how complicated it could be. But this example is a complete sentence, as you've seen. It's not rocket science, or I would say doing something like learning Proverbs is not rocket science. So that example is a complete sentence. Next one is time flies. So often you'll hear just time flies. Again, this is an idiom. This is not a proverb. This is kind of a review from our last class, but often you'll just hear people say time flies. And that's that could be actually a complete sentence because you have a subject and a verb, right? Time and flies. But you also might hear people say time flies when you're having fun. It just means that time is passing quicker than you expected. So again, that one is a complete sentence. And I have one more example for you. To be the apple of someone's eye. I think people liked this image last time, so I used it again. If my wife, for example, if I said my wife, her name is Alder. Alder is the apple of my eye. So that means, you know, I have a place in my heart for Alder. Or it's another way to say that you love somebody or you have strong feelings for somebody. And that one is not a complete sentence. You can't say apple of someone's eye. You need to put that into a sentence and have the person that you're talking about be the subject for that sentence. So those are just a few examples of idioms, right? These are expressions, some observances of things around you, like time flies when you're having fun, for example. That's an observance. You're just observing that time really goes a lot faster when you're focused on something that you're doing. To be the apple of someone's eye, you're observing a relationship. Again, it's a colorful way to describe that relationship. kind of artistic, kind of poetic. But we're going to move to some Proverbs now, and these are not quite as poetic. And these talk about wisdom or advice, right? Advice from somebody who might know better than you do how to respond in a situation or how to react. So this one, if you've ever been on an airplane before, you've heard this message. But it's also considered a proverb because you can use this to describe other situations. The proverb itself is, make sure you have your own mask on before helping others with theirs. So it's very good advice. Of course, it originated on airplanes because in the event of an emergency, if you're on an airplane, the oxygen level might leave the airplane. And without oxygen, of course, we would die. So emergency oxygen masks come down, you put them on. But a lot of people, what they'll do, just their reflex will be not put their own mask on, but if they're with their child, like in this example, they'll help their child first before they put their own mask on. Well, the problem with that is that you have a very short amount of time that you can survive without oxygen. And what happens first is you go unconscious, right? You pass out. And then if you do that, you can't help anybody, right? And your child still can't help themselves. So it's better to help yourself, put your own mask on before you help somebody else. Because if you don't put your mask on, you can't help yourself, you can't help anybody, right? So the first thing and the meaning of this proverb is make sure that you are okay first, right? That's the first thing. Make sure that you're okay before you help somebody else. And in the event of the current situation, like with COVID and the coronavirus, help yourself first. Like a lot of people want to help other people, but if they're sick, then they're not helping anybody else, right? So make sure that you are healthy first. That's the most important thing. And then after you're healthy and you're strong, then yes, you should help other people if you can. So that's one good proverb. And it's kind of a newer proverb. This proverb is definitely an older proverb. And you might have something similar like this in Russian or Kyrgyz, because you have a lot of chickens, of course. But this is, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Do you have something like this, Aida, in either Kyrgyz or in Russian?
I don't think so. We have a very similar like proverb, like "Çocuğun gözünde sana." I think you have this example later.
Okay, all right. Well, we don't want to spoil the example, but Aida, can you guess what this proverb means?
Maybe don't risk, don't risk when you're doing something. Like just putting all eggs in one basket. You are like in risky situation. If you fold all of them, they're gonna be like
they all break.
Yes, they all break, and of course, like don't be risky.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, protect things, right? Individually. Don't put everything that you have. Don't put all of your faith in one thing, right? So if you put all your eggs in one basket, it means you're only looking at one thing, and if that thing fails, if you have a problem, if it breaks, then you don't have anything left to rely on. So you could even think of this in financial terms, right? If you are looking to make an investment, usually the most common advice you get from somebody is don't put all of your money in one place, right? Don't invest all of your money, for example, in real estate or in the stock market or in gold or whatever, because that market that might crash and then you wouldn't have any money left. So you want to diversify, which means put a little bit of your money here, put a little of your money here, put a little bit of your money here. And then if you have a problem with one of those places, well, at least you have your other your money in other places, so you'll be safe. So that's kind of what that means. But yeah, okay, good. Next example. All right. This one, this is the one you were mentioning?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, then I don't need to explain the meaning, but this one is a little bit related to the last one because it's about chickens and eggs, right? Don't count your chickens until they hatch, right? It seems obvious. Yeah, of course, it just means that you can't count on having something before you actually have it, right? So just wait until everything you have is there and then continue. And another connection here with birds. We started with eggs and then we went with birds and now we're still with birds. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. This is a classic proverb. And it just means that if you have something like this is a bird in your hand, it's worth more than, and this is probably more for a hunter, right? So people used to hunt birds. Well, they still do. And if you have a bird in your hand, you already have that, right? So you should be happy that you have one bird. You know, it's your dinner for your family, maybe. Not this bird. This would not be a very big dinner for your family. But if you have a different type of a bird that you might hunt, like a turkey or a pheasant or something like that, then you should be happy, right, with the one bird you have. And then you might see a bush or a tree with two more birds, right? And then you think, well, I want those, but you don't have those, right? So they are not valuable to you because you don't have those. So be happy for what you have is kind of what this proverb means. Be content. Don't be greedy. Don't be selfish. Don't want more than what you have. So this is a very good proverb. And I love this cloud. I love this proverb. Every cloud has a silver lining, right? So usually, for a lot of people, clouds are maybe not a good thing, right? So generally, people don't like clouds. Of course, in the middle of summer in Bishkek or in most of Kyrgyzstan, you would like to see a cloud, right? You would like to have some rain. But I think for a lot of people, clouds mean rain, and rain means cold, and you don't want to be outside. And unless you're a farmer, then you often don't want rain, right? But every cloud has a silver lining. And these clouds you can see a little bit, but around the edge of the cloud, that's where the light comes through. Sometimes it looks like the cloud has a silver lining, like literally. But what it means is that every bad situation, there's something good with every bad situation, right? So for example, COVID, that's a pretty bad situation. Most people will agree. You know, there are silver linings to this. There are small positive elements and outcomes for the coronavirus. And one is, I think the environment, right? Because so many less people are driving. I think around the world, we've seen the air quality really improve. And I'm sure you saw that in Bishkek probably early on when the lockdown happened in April, although the air usually starts getting better after TETS is turned off. But with the cars, right? No one's driving nearly as much. So the environment really has improved. The air quality has improved. So that's an example of a cloud with a silver lining. Okay, and we'll look at another one. I think this is also a very old, but a good proverb. Take it with a grain of salt. Take it. Okay, well, that maybe not is very obvious. Take it. So take what? Take a situation. That's what the it involves, right? Take the situation with a grain of salt. That means put it in perspective, right? The situation maybe is not so bad if you look at the whole you look at the whole context, right? It's not that big of a problem. So you usually tell this to somebody who is really worried about something that maybe if you look at the big picture, that's one of the idioms we used last time. If you look at the big picture, that it's not that big of a problem, right? It seems like a big problem at the time because you're upset, you're emotional, but you tell somebody this when you want them just to forget the problem. It's not worth worrying about. It's not worth your stress or your bad feelings about. So just take it with a grain of salt. You know, if you had a failure at work or you said something that you didn't mean to, okay, you know, that's too bad, but stop thinking about it. You don't need to worry about that anymore.
Yes.
And there's a lot of proverbs like this. You hear other proverbs basically telling people, you don't need to worry. You know, it's okay. You made a mistake, but learn from this mistake and you can move on.
It's Ryan, it's very similar to the phrase like take it easy.
Take it easy, right? Take it easy. Like, don't worry about it. Yeah, I think so many of us tend to worry about things that we really don't need to worry about. And one of my philosophies, it has nothing to do with Proverbs, but is to try to think about if you can't change something, then stop worrying about it, right? If you don't have the ability to change a situation, then stop being concerned. Don't be stressed about that thing, right? And that's, of course, it's so easy to say, but it's really difficult to remember when you are upset about something. But that's a motto that I live by. It's a philosophy that I try to remember a lot. Like, I don't need to worry about something if I can't change it. But if there's something that I can do to make the situation better, okay, then maybe I should worry about it and see if I can help. So, the early bird gets the worm. So, Ida, can you think about what this means? And maybe do you have something like this in Kyrgyzstan?
Yes, we have the similar proverb in Kyrgyz, in Russian. Like, if someone gets up earlier, so he or she has more opportunities to
exactly
have something like chance.
Yep. I mean, I guess another way to say this is don't be lazy, right? Don't sleep in because, you'll have more opportunities if you get up in the morning and start the day fresh. Hopefully you don't get a worm because we don't want worms, but birds want worms. And so that's the best time to find them. And I think this is our last example here. There are plenty more fish in the sea. And this is advice that you give to somebody, often for a relationship, right? If you have a problem with your girlfriend or your boyfriend, and maybe you break up, and you're not in that relationship anymore, that's what you would tell somebody. It's sad that you left, you're not with that person anymore, but there's plenty more fish in the sea, which means there's plenty of other people that you can be with, and maybe even better than your current or than your previous relationship. But often, you can use this with anything else, anything that you lost. Like maybe if you had a bike stolen, which would be very sad, of course, as well. But you can say, oh, there's more fish in the sea. Like, you'll get another bicycle. But if you lose something, right? It's something, when somebody loses something, and presumably there's more of those things, then you say there's plenty more fish in the sea. So those are just a few examples of Proverbs, just to give you an idea of how Proverbs work in English, in American English. I think you might see some of those proverbs also in British English as well, because we do share a lot of different sayings with the Brits. But I've provided a couple different resources for you for learning Proverbs and seeing a lot more examples. The ones that I gave you, most of those were from Fluent U, which is a great resource for learning English. The URL is there if you want to copy that. And it's basically a collection of, I think they have about 17 or 18 different proverbs, and they kind of go into detail about describing the meaning and the use of those proverbs. And then Quizlet is actually the next one. It says quilt. That's a typo. It should say Quizlet. But the URL, the link there is below. There is a flashcard, free collection of, I think, 54 different proverbs with flashcards that you can use. So on one side of the flashcard is the proverb, and on the other side is the meaning of that proverb. So if you really want to learn a lot of proverbs, that's a great way to do it. I think for me, I really benefit from using flashcards when I'm trying to learn a language. And again, of course, just like with idioms and everything else that we've been talking about, try to practice using some of those proverbs in conversation or in informal writing as well. You know, don't maybe try to learn one new proverb a week and use that in any conversation that you have, if you can use that. And that's great. Okay, so please, if you enjoyed this class, if you found this useful for you, please like the class and share the class with other people that you think might benefit from it. Also, please leave suggestions for topics for other classes that you might be interested in the future, and we'd be happy to consider other topics for you. And then be safe and be kind, which really ends up being the same thing, right? By being safe, you're going to wear a mask when you're around other people. And also socially distance yourself, right? If you're with people, make sure you're at least 2 meters apart when you're in public. Even outside, it's still important to stay at least 2 meters away from people. So that's being safe for yourself, right? But it's also being kind to other people. So we don't only wear a mask for ourselves to keep ourselves safe, we also wear a mask to protect other people, right? Because you think that maybe you feel good, you're not sick, and you don't need to wear a mask. It's okay. You're strong. You have a good immune system. But the problem with this virus is that maybe you do have it, but you do not have symptoms. You do not feel sick. Or maybe you just got the virus and your symptoms haven't started yet. I think there's several days where you can still have the virus and be infected, but you don't realize it. You don't feel anything, and you're still spreading all of these, the germs, all the virus. So be kind and wear a mask when you're with other people, because we don't know. We just don't know if we have the virus and we can spread it to other people. And even if you are young and you're strong and you get the virus, sometimes it affects different people different ways. Young people are dying from this virus. Young people are getting symptoms that maybe are permanent problems, with your body. So this is not something you want. Just wear a mask and please socially distance. I can't stress that more right now. It's very important for Kyrgyzstan, for America, for Brazil, for the UK. These places are all really, really struggling right now. So it's not just Kyrgyzstan, of course. And again, I just want to say that we're with you and that we're all in this together, and it will end. So please be patient, be safe, be kind, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Thank you very much. It was a really great presentation, and thank you very much for your important message at the end of your presentation. I think it's time to check the questions. We started to receive questions. Oh, the chickens are counted in autumn. That was similar to one of those proverbs that you mentioned in your presentation.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I haven't heard that one before. And that is that a proverb in Russian or in
In
Kyrgyz?
Russian and in Kyrgyz, yes.
Oh, okay. So, and that means the same thing, basically. I think that one is more connected with a time, right? So don't,
Yes.
yeah, wait until the right time to count what you have. Yeah, that's nice.
Yes. One more question. Have you any books with proverbs?
Um, Personally, no, I don't have a book of Proverbs, but yes, there are books of Proverbs. I think if you just go on to Google and say a book of Proverbs, well, if you write book of Proverbs, what you're going to get is information about the Bible, right? Because in the Bible, we do have a book of Proverbs. So be careful when you're Googling that, because that's not what you're looking for. But if you say something like Book of American Proverbs or Book of English Proverbs, then you will get more results, and you'll probably get several recommendations for titles. You can Google that, or you can go into Amazon, of course, as well. And Ida, maybe that is something that we have at the Bishkek AC. I would be surprised if we didn't have some type of a book with proverbs.
Yes, we have. Yes, we have few books on American proverbs. So yes, when we'll open, so you can come to Bishkek AC and take these books.
Yeah, but there are many resources online. If you're not looking specifically for a book, you can find many examples online. So the two I gave you will be good resources for you to start. But yes, to answer your question, there are many books with examples of proverbs.
Thank you, Ryan. So we have one more question. Thank you for your useful and informative presentation. In Kyrgyz language, we have a lot of proverbs. So we use proverbs in our speech. When we learn American proverbs, we get the meaning or try to find the equivalence. So for example, as like as two pears, in Kyrgyz we say as like as two lamps.
Ah, okay. Yeah, and I think it's because, and this goes back to my point where the wording is not important, right? You have ones and you can translate them kind of, and it still has the same meaning, right? You're using different words, different visualizations, really, but the meaning is the same. The meaning does not change. And a lot of these proverbs they're lessons, right? They're like a very small lesson. They're advice, they're wisdom, usually from older people, like your parents or grandparents or people that have learned some of these life lessons. So yes, I think a lot of these proverbs do exist around the world, and maybe different words or different sayings, but the message is the same, which is also a very interesting way to learn that. So after you learn some in English, see if you can find the equivalent in Russian or Kyrgyz to really learn that proverb. And I think even in English, we have several different proverbs for the same message. And I'm sure you do in Kyrgyz or in Russian as well. So the important thing is the message, but how you deliver the message, of course, makes it more meaningful.
Yes, you're right, Ryan. Thank you very much. So one more question. Which proverb is your favorite one?
I think, well, one of the ones that I used, but it's very similar. Don't cry over spilled milk is another good one. It's a little bit similar to don't put all your eggs in one basket, but don't cry over spilled milk. is a proverb that I use a lot, and I think to myself a lot, right? And it means basically if something is, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. If you can't change something, if there's a problem that happens, don't keep thinking about it, because it's only going to make things worse, right? If you keep thinking about this problem and you're sad, and then you're with other people and then they become sad because you're sad, it's contagious, your feelings, right? So if you can control your feelings, and not to be sad or upset about something that happened, don't be angry as well about something that you cannot change. So that message, that idea, I think is probably one of my favorite.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. One more question. Is it correct to use proverbs in personal statements, in official letters? So where is reliable to use proverbs?
Yeah, that's a very good question. No, I think in general, both idioms and proverbs are really mainly used in spoken English. Of course, this is the request was for me to talk about this in our virtual writing class. And yes, it's perfectly acceptable to use both idioms and proverbs in informal writing, creative writing and poetry and storytelling, but not in formal writing. Part of the reason is because proverbs are advice, right? So if you, for example, for a cover letter, you're not giving the institution your advice. That would not sound very good, right? Or if you're applying for a job, you don't want to give advice to your potential future employer. That would sound very arrogant, and just not acceptable in definitely not in a cover letter, or a CV, any formal writing like that. I'm not saying that you would never do that in formal writing, but I can't think of an example where you would use that. So I would say most of the time, no, don't use those in cover letters.
Got it. Thank you
Good
very
question.
much, Ryan. The next question, is it true that proverbs represent the culture?
Definitely, yes, they do. And I think, and again, I think although the meaning can be translated, you have some of the same types of proverbs that we have, with the same message essentially, but different words. So the way that you say those things, right? The words that you use to communicate the messages, that I think communicates more about your culture. And like I said at the beginning, we might have the same proverb that we say different ways in different parts of the US. But the message is the same, right? The advice or the wisdom is the same, but we say it differently. Like, for example, chickens are counted in autumn, right? So this is more thinking about the seasons, right? The time, the weather, more than about how to place, right? Because if you're don't count chickens before they hatch, or don't put all your eggs in one basket. You're talking about a place, right? All the things that you're collecting, you're putting in a place. But this, you're talking about a time. So yeah, it looks at the same message, but with a little bit different perspective. So again, very interesting to compare the different proverbs and to really get a better idea of the culture, because as all of you know by now, language and culture are connected, right? Completely. But the messages aren't always connected, but the language is. So to me, it's fascinating to separate the language from the meaning, right? Because the whole idea of communication is to convey a meaning, but you use different words, and different people use different words different ways, and that really does show different sides of culture.
Mhm. Yes, great. Thank you very much, Ryan. So, this was our last question to you. So, thank you very much, everyone who participated in our session, for your great questions and comments, and of course, a special thanks to Ryan. It was a really informative and very useful presentation. Thank you very much, everyone. Now I think it's time to say goodbye. Be safe, be kind, and take care of yourself. And see you next time. Bye bye. Have
Bye,
a good
everybody.
night.
Be safe.